life, and you have to change.
You have to do the whole thing.
You have to do the whole thing, and anyway, okay. Let's see.
Let me turn my phones off.
Yeah, I should probably.
Otherwise, it'll beep through the whole meeting.
I was getting your messages too. It's 11:11. Perfect time to start. Okay. This looks nice. I was talking with a doctor, not even just a professor, over at UTA.
Yes.
She gave me the 30,000 foot view of affordability, why it's in the conversation right now so much, where it started in the 80s, globalization, all this stuff. What I want from you is the 1,000 foot view.
Mm-hmm. So,
well, let's start off basic. What does affordability mean? Because it's kind of a vague word. But like, what does it mean?
Yeah, no, it's the first question that we should be asking, because, I mean, honestly, what's affordable at different income levels is a completely different definition, and even if you take something like an average, what's the median income, that can be problematic. We're finding this out right now. Our DFW Metropolitan Service Area, MSA. And I don't mean to throw jargon at you, but it includes the entire region, Dallas, Fort Worth, all the subsidiary communities. They have one average income that's about 20,000 more than the city of Denton's average income. And of course, the average income is everyone from people that are, needing direct support through Alice households to middle income out to the rich. So we have everything in between, but our average is about 20,000 less than the regional average. So if we start designing programs for affordability around the average for the region, that's actually above the average for our citizens. And even then, I mean, averages are good, but they're averages. There's no such thing as the average Dentonite, right? That's a composite thing that doesn't exist. So affordability is, does your income allow you to live in a sustainable, and I don't mean that in an environmental way, but in an ongoing financially supportable position? And what do what is sort of your base level, and then what anything above the base that fits into your standard of living for the community. And I think we're seeing a lot of, and to the point that you led off with, that the other person you talked to went back into the 80s. I think there has been for a while in the United States, the level of income increase hasn't stayed up with the cost of living increase. So those are going up at two different levels, and they're both going up. So you can't say that salaries aren't going up, but you can say that the costs of living in society on a per basis, it used to be that one breadwinner in a household was all you needed, and the other breadwinner could support children in the household, however you arranged that. And then it was, well, both breadwinners needed to have jobs, and now we have to put childcare into the mix. And then it's, well, both breadwinners and one of them has a side hustle. And if you're not a traditional thing, maybe you're combining your income from several gig things. What is the median income? What kind of standard of living do we want to promote in this community? So I know that was a lot of long-winded, but the short answer for affordability is we need a mix of things that brand new, out of high school, out of college, people can afford with beginning salaries. We need established salary households. We need long-term, low, middle, and high income households. And we need then, as your circumstances change, say as you age, can you age in place? Can you stay a vibrant member of your community where you don't have the same level and types of income that you had when you were young and middle-aged? So all of those have to be part of it. So affordable means, do members of our community writ large across the economic spectrum, are they able to have a quality of life that meets a certain standards? Do they have enough free time, or are they constantly saturated working their butts off, more than a 9 to 5, but multiple times. And so this all has to, it's not as easy as saying, oh, well, you should be twice the poverty level or 4 times the poverty level. That's just too glib an answer. And so we need a mix of affordable in this town.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Denton has, like you said, has a wide swath of income levels and where they get the money. And there's neighborhoods that are $1 million+ houses, and obviously there's just student workers.
Correct.
It's a huge range.
Right.
Do you have and if you don't, that's fine. Do you have the demographics of kind of like what Denton's makeup looks like?
It's known. I don't have it with
Sure.
me, or I don't have it, memorized. I do know that, like I was saying in the previous question, our area median income for the region is right around $96,000 to $100,000 a year. Denton's is about 20 less than that, in the 70s and 80s, and so and part of that is understandably, what are we? What distinguishes us from most? Not every town in the Metroplex, but most towns in the Metroplex. We're a college town. Well, wait, what does that mean? That means we're enriched in people at the beginning of their adult lives who are going and bettering themselves for the most part. Most college students tend to skew younger, and they tend to skew lower income. They tend to skew mixed job prospects. They're not only going to school, but they got to find a job that allows them to dovetail with their education. And so we have a demographic that, because of the college nature, skews towards those university demographics, as well as then people that have loved this town for 50 years and stayed here, ex-professors, ex-staff members, people that came to UNT to get an education and stayed to become artists and stay in the community. So we're inextricably tied to the university community, and that leads us to the kinds of problems that are not unique but typical of university communities, like lots of dynamic changes in households as people try to match their educational needs and their financial resources.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'll start here. There's plenty of programs out there for people that are struggling. DHAC or Denton Affordable Housing. There's Habitat. You have to apply for all that and that stuff, but that's not everyone can access those kinds of programs. Like what?
Well, I'll push back, but
sure,
keep going.
Please, no, please. Well, I was just gonna say, what, as a city councilman, and there's a mayoral election coming up, and I'm sure some of the things that people will be running on is affordability, because that's what everyone's talking about. What are some of the options people have?
Yeah, no. If you're at the bottom and you need help, then let's start there and move on. Not because it's not a critical thing, but the affordable crisis and the drop of many more households into asset limited, income constrained households is a real problem, as salaries don't keep track with cost of living, and rents are going up and mortgages are going up, and millennials and younger despair of ever actually getting into a home that they own. If you're at the bottom and you're trying desperately to hold on by your fingernails, let's start at something that people that might be watching this video can at least start with in their own lives and on their own phones and computers, and that's findhelp.dentoncounty.gov. So if you need assistance from United Way, from Salvation Army, from ODB, from these other program interfaith ministries, if you need a safety net, that's a good place to find resources for a safety net. And now, but your real question is where can we, not your real question, but the implication of your question was, where can we take advantage of additional resources, and what can the city council do to help? And I think there's a couple real critical things that we've got to be careful of. One of the things that contributes, there's sort of three infrastructure-y kind of things that really contribute to the cost of living in this town. And that is, car culture and how do we deal with it. No, people are less and less able to afford cars. It used to be that was, 2-car garage, 2 cars in the garage, 2 cars in the driveway, blah, blah, blah. And increasingly for both affordability reasons and honestly, just because the younger generations are more aware of the impacts they have on their world and their world has on them, they're choosing and trying to either by force or by desire live with less vehicles because they recognize the impacts of those. But to maintain those streets costs the taxpayers. And whether you're talking about state of Texas taxes through TxDOT, or you're talking about our local Department of Transportation, our local streets and local infrastructure, somebody is paying for those roads, and that somebody is us. And so we need to do the best job possible to limit the impacts and have, to the extent possible, growth pay for any impacts on existing infrastructure and the new infrastructure coming in. And so we need to also facilitate ways of having you live in this society, in Denton, without a car. Why? Because, well, one, limiting the impacts on the roads by less car culture means that the lifetime of the road goes up. And maybe we can spend more of the money on sidewalks and other pedestrian bike lanes and stuff instead of car culture. And then on top of that, how do we get away from car culture? I've got to give you an opportunity to have some sort of transportation. And so this is where places like DCTA and other mass transit offerings have to be. We have to have transit-oriented design in this thing. It can't just be an afterthought that our neighborhoods and our apartment complexes and our townhomes and our missing middle and all those, we talked about housing for people that need a safety net. They absolutely critically depend on buses. So all transit-oriented design has to be in everything we do because that's how people without cars get around. Think about any city that you want to visit, live in, that you put on a pedestal and say, I visited this and they were great. They have a really great mass transit system, whether it's trains, whether it's buses, whatever it is, it's there. And so we need to focus on transit-oriented design. We need to focus on giving people an opportunity to not engage in car culture. Whether you're doing it voluntarily or against your will, you'd love to have a car, but you just can't afford it anymore. And some of that is don't have sprawl on the edge of town. As MUDs and MMDs and other things come on the edge of town, if you allow the city to hollow out on the inside and all develop in a big ring on the outside, then you're forcing our citizens to say, well, I want to go to the square, but I can't bus there, bike there, walk there. I want to spend my dollars in a place where there's already sewer, there's already water, there's already electricity. It doesn't cost that much to put in a new business. But no, I've got to live 10 miles outside of town. So we have to, affordability includes making sure that we focus our efforts centralized. And that's been part of our comprehensive plan for years. But sometimes we don't always hold up to our ideals. So in addition to making sure that all development is transit-oriented design development, we also need to be mindful that we're careful about exceptions to the comp plan. We don't just change it all the time. We don't need sprawl on the edge of town forcing us to put sewer and water where we weren't necessarily planning to do it. And because those costs are spread out amongst everyone. And we try to mitigate that with impact fees and water fees and other things. But in the long run, it's just more expensive to put it on the edge of town than to have it in the center of town. We need to have opportunities for folks that do have walkability or cars to understand how to get around the center of town. So part of transit-oriented design and keeping sprawl down will also be, how do I tell people where the parking is? A lot of people that will not get off car culture, because this is America and we love our cars. One of the complaints we hear all the time is, well, I don't go downtown where I would spend my money because I can't find a place to park. The fact is, when we did a parking study, we found out that at maximum, we're only 70% parked on Friday and Saturday, even not during Halloween Town, or during Christmas. Those are exceptions, and we were getting hundreds of thousands of visitors for those two kinds of events. So that's different. But for your average, week-to-week existence, we've got our transportation team working on how can we manage the parking that we have better. So, and why is this important? Because the taxpayers don't need us spending $20,000 a parking space. That's what it costs to build a parking space, $20,000, and that's just upfront costs. That's not annual maintenance costs of the parking spot. And so if you want a 500 unit parking garage, do the math. It's no less than 20,000 times 500. And that's one time. That's not electricity. That's not maintenance. That's not workers. That's not paint. That is just build it. And so it would be better to use the parking that we have now to its maximum extent. And how do we do that? Well, a little bit of money could go to navigational aids. So, we can make it affordable with a little bit of money helping you find the parking so that you can participate in the town that you live in better. So we need to do those little pieces. And then, so this is all infrastructure. And then the last thing that really is hitting people in the pocketbooks is the change in utilities that we're seeing. Water, wastewater, and electricity as the big ones. Solid waste hasn't really ballooned out that much, but that's the trash and recycling. That's going to come because the landfill isn't going to last forever. But for the water, wastewater, and electricity, we need to do a better job. And I think it's clear that look at the impacts that you have. You have large developments that have a lot of water needs or a lot of electricity needs or and those costs are shared out over all of the ratepayers. So how do we fix that so that the impacts of growth pay for growth? I think you allow, or at least even if we don't worry about growth per se, and that's a bugaboo that we'll come back to in a second, but growth is a challenge. We got about 18 to 20% growth in this town, and it's a challenge adding all that infrastructure. But one of the things we can work on an affordability aspect for utilities is tier the usage. Your small person living in a 2-room house or a condo or an apartment, they're not using much water, much electricity, much wastewater, sewer. So we need to do a better job of tiering those. And we have not a terrible job on water and wastewater. That's tiered at about 6 different levels. So it represents, the smaller people pay a smaller rate. And if you're really pushing the system, your charged rate. But we're beginning to take steps towards that on even things like electricity. We recently implemented for our large loads, things like data centers and really big factories, where we are having a separate sort of large load rate that represents the extra burden, the out of size burden that the buying the power and getting the transmission. So we can tier those rates so that lower income folks that tend to have lower consumption, and we'll come back to that in just a second, but we can get their rates we can set the middle of the road sort of average household is going to pay kind of what we do now. But if you're a low consumption household, small apartment, student that's just getting off, if you're living in your footprint, if you're being responsible and going to your job and living within your means, then you'll pay a little bit less than the average. And if you're a big user, you've made it, you're going to pay a little bit more than the average. And I think that consumption-based tiering, we've already got, sort of a summer-winter tier and a sort of below 1,000, above 1,000. But I think that's showing you that the impact regular folks are feeling, regular small businesses are feeling, is we need to do more. We need to set those at a more or a less regressive curve and really promote folks that are living within their capacity and charging a little bit more for those folks that are pushing the needs. And I think that'll help with affordability.
Well,
that was a lot. I apologize.
No, that's great because you're touching on a lot of things that I wanted to talk about anyway.
It's complex. Affordability is all the vectors that are coming in. Your job is not paying you enough. You've got all your costs are increasing. In some degree, the lower and middle income homes are being hollowed out by the cost of living and the lack of their ability of their salaries to keep up with it. And so, but governments can intentionally take practices and do the kinds of things that match those curves better and afford you a better quality of life at the different income strata.
That actually leads into my next two questions. But going back to the tiered system, what's stopping you guys from really fully implementing that?
I think two things. Well, three. One is the zeroth order thing is anytime change, there's sort of a viscosity to change. People get, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm afraid of if I don't fully understand it, and that's totally fair, right? So the city has to do its due diligence to make sure that the city and its staff fully understand the problem set and the potential solutions, that the community is fully aware of which solutions match their culture and community the best, that we don't see undue influence from any one particular area of our community, putting their thumb on the scale for, certain responses that may not help others. And maybe the time when that kind of thumb on the scale might be appropriate is for your lowest economic, strata folks, because they really have no options. They're barely surviving. So yes, we need to put our thumb on the scale a little bit for those folks to help them make ends meet. But we've got to do a better job of educating, and that gets over that fear factor. And then I think some of the things are coming about because of technology, like navigational aids. That's technology. Better utility infrastructure is going to require us to not just have, say, electrical meters that measure in and out, but measure in and out on a 15-minute time basis. Measure water on a 15-minute time basis, so that people that are trying to be responsible and turn their sprinklers off and do the right thing see the results and measure the results and get the feedback. And so we have to adjust and make sure that there's education and the ability for folks to manage their own lives to a large extent.
So those are, that's a ton of great plans and ideas. Are there like propositions you guys have come up with that or you're trying to get through and get past, or like what's stopping those from getting? Nothing
per se, except sort of will. Some staff is initiating things like staff would love to have, and as council isn't really fighting. It's just an issue of budget, getting smart meters on the various utilities. So that's just coming. And there was a big push when the federal government said, hey, we're updating the lead standards. So cities all over the United States, you're already having to do infrastructure to satisfy our lead things. All these cities are taking the time to say, now's the right time to kill two birds with one stone and be fiduciarily responsible and update infrastructure while we're already doing something the federal government is making us do. And so some people may complain, well, the federal government made us update the lead standards. You don't want lead in your water. And it's a perfect opportunity to use that now. So that's been one factor. It's also, we do have I know over the last few years, I have been pushing tiered rates, and it's just a matter of going through our governmental process. So when a counselor or a staff member comes up with an idea, they float that idea through a committee or to council. It gets vetted. All the ramifications, the pros and cons of it have to get out there. We often have to have community meetings. And so unless it's a crisis, we've got to be deliberative. I think what we've seen back to the growth, the 20% growth year to year, we've seen a lot of the pressures because it has taken sustainable, deliberative, intentional growth to, oh crap, here it comes. Oh, here it is again. Oh my God, and here it is again, and here it is again. And we are having to run just to stay in place. And that's not giving us time to work through, fully vet out, well, what does it mean to put this kind of development here? And oh, well, we put an apartment complex there, but where are the services for that? And the intentionality isn't that it's not done. It's just if you're at home and your spouse is shouting things at you, your dog is barking, and your kids are yelling at you, then there's so much cacophony that just being barely able to maintain and put the dinner in front of the children and not the dog, and shutting the door on your spouse. No, don't do that. But it gets challenging doing the right things in the right order, and so it's totally understandable. But we just need to maintain a deliberative process and not be so reactionary. I think there's a tendency during crisis moments when things are on quote unquote fire to be very reactionary, just like I'm going to put out this now and go on to the next thing, and like, wait a minute, did I do this properly so that I don't have a fire in the future? Because I don't have any more bandwidth for any more fires. And I think we just have to keep our eye on the ball of being intentional all the time. And this is where it will help to have metrics. And I don't want to get all wonkish, but it'll have, if it's in the code, if it's in the development code, we'll just do it. If it's in our rules, in our criteria manuals, in our development patterns, we will just do it because that's the rules, and we'll follow the rules. So now's the time to change the rules to give us the quality of life so that the services are servicing our community, and our community doesn't accidentally, unintentionally start servicing the services. This is about community and community first, and the things that promote a healthy, functional community. It's not the other way around. And our community isn't there as a cog in the wheel for a business. Our businesses are there to promote and stabilize community. And I think that's it's not a ball we dropped. We just need to sometimes make sure that we maintain the community first priority.
Yeah, I mean that segues perfectly into the second part, or the kind of last area. Are there legislative triggers, or is it just you guys looking out for the like you kind of said, once we cross this threshold, then we got to start doing stuff? Is that built in yet, or is it just you guys as city councilmen representing your districts, like, hey, my district's not doing so hot, let's start doing things, so putting out those fires? So some of the fires are, we rely on the community, and I know it's a trope, but it does take a village. We rely on the community to identify problems. In the papers recently, in our community recently, there's been some issues with some neighborhoods on Old North at University. There's been some issues with some neighborhoods at Sherman and Hercules, at Wind River, at Bonnie Bray. These are places where there was planning, there's master planning, but now for various reasons, they're not all the same reasons, there's crisis. And how you respond to crisis is as important as to how you respond to business as usual. And I think there's an opportunity to help have the, sort of quote unquote crowdsource a lot of things with the community where they help us keep track. So of what are the crises and then what are the solutions. Back to the university, we have all these faculty that are expert in these things, whether it's water, whether it's wastewater, whether it's economic development, whether it's maker spaces or other things that are important to Denton. We have all these faculty, and I think we could do a much better job. There's only 7 counselors, and we act as the two-way bullhorn. The community
contacts us so that we can start arranging for activities in the city. The city tries to communicate with those same 7 counselors to get back out to the community information on a fine-grained level, and it has to go both ways, and so we can always do a better job of that. But I think there's an opportunity now. Now is the right time. In fact, probably the right time was 20 years ago, but there's the right time. The second best right time is now, and that is to have an ombudsman for the city in economic development and strategic grants to have to leverage things like Heather Gregory Stoke to incubate activities in the city so that we leverage and amplify the college town and get that in. So you were asking how does it work? So we do require. So let me. I'm kind of going back and forth. I think there's an opportunity to leverage our strengths additionally in the university crowd so that academic findings are put onto the streets faster. But also we do rely on just day-to-day community members letting us know about problems. We do, but we also need those community members to tell us of the 5 or 6 solutions that we come up with from the academic community and from staff. What's the one that hits your vibe the best? What's the one that aligns with your needs the most? Which ones are you willing to pay a little more for because the quality's a little higher? Which ones you were like, nope, I need the barest minimal thing here. And that is, we have to take the temperature of the community. And that's where it's constant give and take responsiveness. You can't just listen to one part of the community and say, well, this one element of the community really needs this one pipe or this one substation or this one thing. That's fine as long as it services the overall needs of the community, but it can't just be the largest, most well-heeled voice. It has to be a combined, holistic approach. We have to hear everything. Otherwise, you won't maintain Denton the way we have been. Since the universities came in, we went from an agricultural community to a college town. And I dispute the whole towns and gowns thing. I don't think that exists. I know we always use it as a trope of the locals versus the university people, but the locals all went to school here and they live here and breathe here and everything. We are all one cohesive whole. And so we're a college town. And so I think we need to take better advantage and get better implementation of that. Use the ridiculously gifted capacity of our citizens who are super well educated to give us that feedback. I know that was a lot of answers, but we don't have to wait on Austin. We don't have to wait on the federal government. We're seeing that some of our funding was cut. How are we responding? Well, people in the community stepped up during the recent SNAP benefits crisis, and they said, I'm going to feed kids. All right? Well, federal government's a chaos. We didn't get some funding in the Clear Creek region, but other neighbors are stepping up and saying, well, wait a minute, we're going to go for others, we're going to try to bundle other smaller opportunities. We're going to reuse the hot funds in a smarter way. The community has to take a community-first approach. And when that includes state and federal government, great. That's just icing on the cupcake, because now we can do big things, bold things, beautiful things, different sets of BBBs than maybe your audience thinks of. I think that everything hits local, so we have to remind ourselves that the community has to be first, and everything is implemented locally. And then if we can show our representatives at our state delegation and our federal delegation and remind them these are the critical needs and you're forcing us to solve our own problems. And it's not that we can't. We're, like I said a second ago, we're gifted and we're smart and we're engaged with each other. But hey, representatives in the local state delegation, you can make this a whole lot easier on us with a little intentionality. And hey, representatives at the federal government, you could make this a whole lot easier on us with a little intentionality. And we've already got the state delegation on board already. And so this is where you can't leave any pieces behind. We've got to have it all on the table. All right, we've got to be able to work and together and bring all these different solutions. But it starts here in Denton.
With being community first, I think people will get like for the food crisis during the SNAP crisis.
Right.
And it was wonderful to see the community really come together, the different businesses, the food drives, all this stuff. I think a lot of the frustration with the community is they're like, well, our local government should be paying closer attention to the struggles that we're going through so that we don't have to go through these, we don't have to be the boots on the ground. They don't mind doing it, obviously, but they kind of wish that the city would be able to, that there was some sort of something there so that they felt like the city had their backs when they're struggling, when these crises are happening.
No, I get that. I think one of the things that when we're talking about being organized, the burden isn't simply on the community writ large. And let's make a small point. Our staff and our citizens and our government are not separate. The entire power of the United States and the way we organize our democratic republic is the government is the people. And I think it's real easy for us to lose sight of that. And, maybe it's because I've been a professor or in government at state institutions my entire career. I've been a government employee my entire career, but I'm also a citizen of this town, and I retired and I continue to give back. So I think that's don't separate the government from the people. The government are the people. The government is the voice and implementation of the people. And I know it's challenging when the government consensus is doing something that different stakeholders don't always like. But back to your point about monitoring, we absolutely can do a better job. One of the challenges that we get to is when things begin to fail, it is, you don't, it's people sometimes try to take the tack of, I don't want to fund that anymore, it's failing. But the question is, can you afford not to address a problem? If you can't afford not to address the problem, or the problem occurs more than once or twice, you can't brush it under the rug. You can't sweep it away. If it's going to keep hitting us, we've got to address it. And we've got to monitor it. And so we can't starve the system of the funds and the staffing that it takes to monitor what's going on, to constantly have feedback, to constantly engage. So some of the reason we ask you for paperwork is so that we can monitor. Some of the reason we ask you to use the 311 system is so that we have better databases and our staff are more efficient about finding the problems so that you're not always just reporting issues. We're able to use those technological efficiencies to make our staff as effective as possible while still as cheap as possible. And so we need to do a better job of monitoring and engagement. And so if you say, this is just sort of Brian's rule of thumb, but I think anyone that interacts with the public, whether they're a teacher, whether they're a professor, whether they're a staffer in the city or the state government, 20% of your job you should think of as, I've got to explain to the public what I'm doing because the public funded me. And they don't necessarily have to agree with me, but they have to understand so that they can make the decision whether to keep going down that road or to tell the policymakers to go a different way. And so I think there's a tendency to try to push that, to 85 to 90 to, 100% of my job is just doing my job. Now, you need to spend a solid 20% of your job, 50% of your job telling the public what you're doing. But that means that, for every 4 people, I need an additional staffer because we're all telling the public what we're doing. And it's really challenging to make sure the public understands. But when they do understand, the complaints go down, the solutions go up. They're there crowdsourcing with you saying, because I live across the street from this problem, I can help the city they can make up for that 20% of engagement. Well, 10% of it went away because now their job is easier. So it's not really like 20% of their job is lost to engagement. That engagement is leveraging and amplifying their effectiveness. And so the thing that we have to do is do a yes and approach. Yes to community engagement. Yes to better monitoring. Yes to the fact, I think you can't just say, well, the city doesn't have my back. Why aren't they helping me and be more responsible? We're all responsible. We're all our brothers and sisters keepers. We all have to take our part of the game, and sometimes we have to take extra parts of the game for those times when others cannot, when they're just so behind the eight ball. I'm using all kinds of metaphors here, but when they're so behind the eight ball that they don't have any more bandwidth, there's one, I mixed pools and internet, but when they don't have any more bandwidth to tackle a problem, the screaming, dinner time scenario I said a second ago, then others can help them step up, whether those others are members of their community, their religious community, their non-religious community, nonprofits, and the government all work hand in glove together for those times, because the next time it'll be you having excess capacity and somebody else that needs it. And I think we can take that community approach. So
the last thing.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that's totally fine, and that's good. I mean, because there is bureaucracy. The government can only move so fast, whereas like businesses can immediately start fundraising and that kind of stuff.
We have rules for let's just briefly touch on that. Part of everyone says you move at the speed of government, but that speed of government is the speed of transparency sometimes. It's often the case that I will go and I will ask company X in town, not me, a person can go ask company X in town, hey, I think your business practices is bad. Tell me all your business practices because I want you to improve them. They don't have to tell you that. They're a private business. They can say, go pound sand. All right? I don't have to tell you that. You may not be wrong about that, but you don't have the right to take it upon yourselves to tell an individual company or person, to use the sort of common vernacular. You can't be a Karen about these things. That's so mean to Karens in this world. But you can't be a Karen about a situation. But on the public good, you absolutely have the right. You're a taxpayer and you have the right to that transparency. And to some degree, if we ask you how this, that, or the other thing is run, then we need to be able to produce that documentation and show those efforts and that intent. And it goes to having the intentionality so that the taxpayers know, man, look at how intentional the city of Denton is being. They're doing this on purpose. Or no, they made a mistake, or maybe it's not a mistake, but it's a difference of alignment. So I need to encourage my representatives to flex and change. And so we're not going this way anymore, we're going that way. But now we have the opportunity to do that. You're not just putting out fires and crises, you have the transparency to be able to see the documentation, look back and go, oh, here's where we stumbled. Here's where it's not lining up. We're not having the affordability that we thought we were. We're not saving as many trees as we thought we were. So we have to measure those things. Businesses don't. Individual households don't. They're monitoring their own business, their own household. But the government has to do it, and that slows us down. We can try to streamline and make it easier, make it more facile, but not at the expense of responsibility. So I'm sorry for that little rabbit hole,
it's totally
but responsibility is key to serving your community.
Definitely. This is a bigger question. Vague, probably answer. Are we in an affordability crisis? And if not, what would be some of the signs that you would notice, Brian would notice, for you to call that?
So I don't have a degree in economics, so I don't know the formal definition of how the economists say, well, this change in GDP per this time frame for over this many blah blah blahs is well, this inflection point in the curve is I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that the bulk of my adult life, starting in the 80s, and I don't mean to go outside the city of Denton, but starting in the 80s, we saw, this is back to your earlier question about how many breadwinners, well, I answered with how many breadwinners does it take we've watched our salaries not keep up with our cost of living. And it can be argued that labor costs are a thing that businesses can and should manage. But I'm going to argue at the point where you're not managed, you just throw up your hands and say supply chain. Oh, there's nothing I can do about supply chain. There's nothing I can do about the cost of copper or the cost of wheat. That's just a thing. There's nothing I can do about this, that, the other thing. But I can control labor. I'm not going. I'm going to suppress those. The problem is that means you're sorry. To me, that means that results in the community servicing businesses, because we're not going into this with a partnership where salaries increase commensurately with the cost of living and everything else. I think we've had our thumb on the scale suppressing livability. And this is the other side of affordability. Affordability is, can I, livability, or, can I pay for something at a certain salary level? And we've just watched that, our buying power diminish over time. And it gets confusing because, like big TVs are super cheap now compared to our grandfather's days. Well, they didn't even have huge TVs. Remember the little small one? Well, you're probably too young to remember the little small black and white ones with, vice grips to control the channel changer. But, that was a huge cost. That was, months and months of income to buy something like that. Now you can go to Best Buy and it's pricey, but it's not out of many middle class people's range. But their salaries are just, their housing is now more than a third. By some estimates, half their income. Their costs of health care are a third to half their income. These big ticket things that used to be cheap are now expensive, and the things that used to be expensive are now cheap. And that makes it challenging for the younger X's, the millennials and the Z's that are just getting started. Their paradigms, what they're living through, has to change. We can't be stuck in the mud the way we were. We have to change our paradigm. And I think you saw that in COVID. But back to your question, we saw that in COVID, in that when we shook the snow globe, we're in a different world post-COVID than we were pre-COVID. And I think we need to make sure that we have that flexibility in the system to change paradigms so that we're not leaving people behind. And we started leaving people behind in the 80s, and we continued to do it to this day. And somehow salaries have to get back in line with the cost of living, and it has to be better incorporated. It can't just be the first thing that people go to manage their costs. Back to the idea of a livable wage. What is a livable wage? It's the inverse of affordability. I'm saying you and I and others are saying things aren't affordable at different income levels. At the lowest income levels, at the Alice household level, I don't have enough livable wage. I'm working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, a side hustle. I'm conserving. I'm living below my means, and I'm still slipping. We've just simply got to have a better plan and this is why a few years ago, I do like that some of our vendors and contractors were forced, at the city, we can put intentionality into that too. We talked about intentionality in infrastructure mobility design. Several years ago, we put intentionality in. If you're a vendor and a contractor for the city, you must have a wage standard that meets a certain level. Now, we only did it for the city. I would welcome the opportunity. You talked about our state delegation, our federal delegation. I would welcome legislation from those groups that help the city manage livable wages in a better way, that sets bumper rails in the same way that we're putting year to year increase caps on tax rates for residences. A lot of people can't afford to get into a residence, so they're not seeing the event. They voted unanimously for these property tax caps and rate reductions, and yet something on the order of 54% of people are not in a purchased house. They're renting, and they're not going to see the advantages of that. Half the population is not going to see the advantage of that. The flip side of those kinds of controls need to be something like managing rent better. And we do have those on the books. It's just we only implement them during crises like COVID. So I would like to see that a little looser, so that local governments and local control can say, yep, no, I'm going to pull that trigger this year. Maybe I turn it back off next year, or when things stabilize. But right now we're in a crisis mode. So back to your question of, how can we get out of this? We've got to throw all the tools at all the baskets, because we cannot afford to have two generations of millennial and Z young adults go nihilistic and not see the American opportunities that are there for them.